yourselves to brutes. Men who despise you, enslave you, who regiment your lives, tell you what to do, what to think, or what to feel, who drill you, diet you, treat you like cattle, use you as cannon fodder. Don't give yourselves to these unnatural men, machine men, with machine minds and machine hearts. You are not machines, you are not cattle, you are men. You have the love of humanity in your hearts. You don't hate, only the unloved hate, the unloved and the unnatural. Soldiers, don't fight for slavery, fight for liberty. In the 17th chapter of St. Luke it is written, the kingdom of God is within man, not one man nor a group of men, but in all men, in you. You, the people, have the power to create machines, the power to create happiness. You, the people, have the power to make this life free and beautiful, to make this life a wonderful adventure. Then in the name of democracy, let us use that power. Let us all unite. Let us fight for a new world, a decent world, that will give men a chance to work, that will give youth a future and old age a security. By the promise of these things, brutes have risen to power, but they lie. They do not fulfill that promise. They never will. Dictators free themselves, but they enslave the people. Now let us fight to fulfill that promise. Let us fight to free the world, to do away with national barriers, to do away with greed, with hate and intolerance. Let us fight for a world of reason, a world where science and progress will lead to all men's happiness. Soldiers, in the name of democracy, let us all unite!
This is episode 1 of the Discourse Collective. Thank you for joining us, everyone. This segment is Marxism and Chill, right?
Marxism and Chill.
Marxism and Chill. And in the house today, we have yours truly, Celery.
Yeah, we got Malloy.
Marcus.
All right.
We in here, boys. So today we're going to talk about the manifesto.
The Bible of leftism.
The real
Bible of leftism.
Excuse me, it's the Koran of leftism.
All right, we'll go with
It's the book of Genesis of leftism.
True. Yeah, this is the specter haunting this podcast will be the Communist Manifesto. Because it's hugely influential. Everybody has to read it or else we'll make fun of you. And it's like, it really does lay out pretty much the basics of everything you need to know about communism.
And it's easy to read.
Yeah.
It's easy to read. Anyone can pick it
20
up.
pages. It's 20 pages.
It's a pamphlet,
it was written,
really.
It was yeah, and it was written 150 years ago, but it's still, the language is very, it's not Shakespeare.
Yeah, being mad has its own language, and like the whole pamphlet is just like being mad. Like, you feel it. You're just like, yeah, fuck these guys. Fuck them.
Yeah, like you'll just start railing at fat cats as soon as you read the manifesto.
It's like, yo, who the fuck are these bougie people, huh? I just read this pamphlet, and you're like, that feeling is eternal. That goes on everywhere. Anytime someone's read this pamphlet,
you won't stop sharpening your guillotine.
Yeah, you'll like wake up with a whetstone in your hand and just go back to work, like getting those babies fucking razor edge.
But before we get into the meat and potatoes of the manifesto, we're gonna discuss some of the background information. We're gonna start with the Age of Enlightenment and liberalism, which kind of sets the foundation, sets the stage, and then follow up with the Industrial Revolution, and finally the revolutions of 1848 in Europe, which is the backdrop against which this manifesto was written. And then we'll mostly focus on the first 2 chapters, since the second 2 are pretty much mostly relevant to political events at the time, and really only of interest to serious academics.
But they need to reboot the second 2 chapters.
Yeah, they do. They need a reboot.
We call that a revolution.
We have to fill in the next 2 chapters. We have to rewrite them.
Guys, we need to do a reboot of the American Revolution. Except this time the farmers win, and we cut off George Washington's head.
Nice.
Isn't that Maoism?
We're all Maoists. That's a public service announcement. If you're not a Maoist third worldist, you can leave now. Okay.
All right.
So liberals,
so that's our-
liberals rose.
Liberalism, yeah.
Fucking
liberals.
liberal. None of you are free
Okay.
of liberalism.
So we're gonna start with liberalism, and I mean liberals. When leftists talk about liberalism, it's not Democrats or whatever.
It's not Peter Dow.
Right.
It's,
Liberalism, as in liberty. The big philosophical political idea that came about in the 1700s that formed the basis of the revolutions in the United States and in France, primarily in the late 1700s.
The death of
this is-
feudalism, basically.
The death of feudalism, yeah. This is what Marx refers to as the bourgeois revolutions, these liberal revolutions. And yeah, it's the death of feudalism, it's the death of monarchs, the death of nobility by blood or whatever. And it's, at the time, it was, the triumph of the people over monarchs.
And it's very much the product of the Renaissance. It's very much the culmination of all this fetishization of rationality and the individual, and this idea that individuals can interpret the world, that individuals can do these things. So then how do we reflect that politically? Liberalism was born out of this rational vision.
It was the very beginning of kind of the withering away of the old class system.
Did it wither? Dun, dun, yeah.
Dun, dun, dun.
Dun, dun, dun.
But it's this idea that all men are created equal. Where
have I heard that before?
Yeah, where have we heard that? But yeah, these ideas are embodied in the Declaration of Independence, the French Declaration of Rights of Man and Citizen, that all men are created equal, that they have these inherent inalienable rights, life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. Actually, the French Declaration of Man and Citizen explicitly points out the right of property.
Ooh.
But
So basically,
Ooh.
what we can glean is that there were a bunch of rich landholders who were sick of being paying levies up to monarchs and decided to pursue some semblance of self-determination, and they dragged the serfs with them. But after everything was established, they just kind of reinstituted the nobility through capital.
Anybody heard of a little thing called the Whiskey Rebellion? Talking about some serfs getting sold out, because it's a fairly common thing that it would be the idea that liberalism was this sort of mass movement is totally revision, because really it was led by these rich
upper middle class,
land holding guys who were just you know what, king isn't giving me a square deal and I deserve one because I'm a citizen, I'm a man, I've got rights. But those rights didn't extend downward.
I'm a rugged
They use this-
individualist.
Oh, rugged individual.
Yeah, they use this populist rhetoric to pull in lower class support, working class support, but it was not as widespread as the public is led to believe today. But yeah, the Whiskey Rebellion is a great example. I believe it started as a tax protest, right?
Which is kind of hysterical in the context of what the American Revolution was about. It was about taxes. It was about taxation.
about taxes, yeah.
It was now we're going to levy taxes on whiskey, which wasn't just shit, we can't get drunk. It was, whiskey was a currency for much of Appalachia. So taxing whiskey basically was a huge fuck you to farmers who used it as a source of that was basically their side hustle. After you ran out of grain to take to market, you needed somewhere to do, so you put together a bit of whiskey and could send that out as a form of currency. But you start taxing that, and you're burdening all these farmers.
So the idea of no taxation without representation did not extend to everyone.
Yeah. And
the
the idea of
language-
representation was very vague. It was if your government is beholden to you in some sort of way, but that way was by your state and by all these sort of power by proxy that you would have. It was in no sense the sort of populist modern
And
election.
originally, only property owners were able to vote.
Say what?
Yeah.
What?
Only-
You telling me that it wasn't a democracy?
Well, it's
yeah.
it's just from the jump, the idea that taxes and increases in taxes drove a lot of this dissent is, well, the masses of people working and laborers, they didn't pay taxes. They didn't have money. They just, ate hand to mouth and lived and died underneath these people.
There was this great quote by Thomas Jefferson where he was like, this was sort of in response to him abolishing the tax, and he said like it's a great fact of America that no American citizen ever sees what farm worker or farmhand ever sees the face of a tax collector. And it's like, at the time, that was something people were like, hell yeah, that's why we live in America. Now it's like this weird, deeply anachronistic sort of like fake liberalism that doesn't really exist anymore, because it's like, well, of course you pay taxes, you have to.
Taxes are good.
Like, what? You have to. But
yeah.
The only people who actually do push back on that are like psychotic libertarians
citizens.
who are like, oh,
Libertarians.
taxation's theft. It's theft.
Coercion.
Give it back. You're coercing me. I won't be coerced. It's like that's not it's not an argument. But that is a big change for a lot of those people where taxation starts being this sort of closer to home issue, rather than this sort of like tyrannical. What kind of monster would do that? Like, that was a big transition out of this Age of Enlightenment liberalism idea that, like, your government is beholden to you, to this a lot more oppressive and more like once the curtain comes down, you realize like, oh wait, these rich people were just using me as a tool to establish an economic system that was more beneficial to them specifically.
Right.
Then things start getting a lot uglier.
As we swing into the glorious Industrial Revolution.
Yeah, so that groundwork was laid.
glorious.
Groundwork was laid with liberalism for really capitalism to flourish and expand. And, alongside these technological developments, you have the perfect storm for the Industrial Revolution. And the Industrial Revolution, while it really started in Britain, it spread all throughout Europe and the United States. And you see, it's not just technological changes, it's not just economic changes, but a vast cultural, societal change. And I think, personally, the biggest change was population.
Oh, yeah.
Specifically, you have a rural agrarian society, okay? And now everyone is moving to the cities because the cities is where industry is, it's where work is. It's where, wage labor begins to develop.
It's also where you can't own property.
You can't own property. It's all rents.
Yeah, the Monopoly board is already all bought up in the city.
Yeah, it's
right.
It's like you joined a game of Monopoly where like all the players are like fighting over like Park Avenue, and you're like, oh shit, okay, and you're starting from go with $200.
Even in the most horrifying situations, you have people moving into factory towns where the entire town is owned by the company that owns the factory, and they own the general store, and they pay you with like company credits, script. And so, and it puts these people into a cycle of debt where
and it wasn't like suddenly like everybody started having debt and everybody started. It was a very insidious, slow process where like, oh well, we've laid down all these tracks. Look at all these jobs we've got people doing. Like they're not living in hovels in the countryside anymore, but also the same time.
And it was empowering because now women are able to work. They can leave the home.
I fucking love it when women get to work 16 hours in a shirt factory that'll just burst into flames as soon as you like touch something.
But exactly,
liberation. It's great.
The conditions at the time were awful. Like you said, people working 16. That's not an exaggeration. People would work 12, 15, 16-hour days even. Because
what else are they going to do? You're entering the point where leisure is no longer like part of your life.
And
it doesn't exist.
Where you're constantly in this churning of like, you have to pay rents, you've got these debts crushing down on you. That was the big transition where debt was no longer like this horrible social ill where it was like you ruined your life if you got into debt. It was something that
it was normalized.
You had to take on, or else you weren't able to be a productive member of society.
And say what you will for like the the feudalistic period, but
there's a lot to say.
Well, yeah, but I mean, maybe like this is romanticizing a little bit, but like at least a landholder or a petty lord had some obligation to the conditions of his people that lived on his land and worked.
Well,
for
I mean, have you ever read about the transition in the Scottish Highlands? This was earlier. This predates the Industrial Revolution, but basically the Highlanders clan leaders got taxed a certain amount, and there was a change in the tax for clan leaders, but not for landlords. So basically all these clan leaders just en masse started changing from being the heads of clans, which were a tribal unit, to being the heads of land-holding estates, basically. And that meant that anybody in their clan that couldn't pay rent was evicted. And it was a mass eviction. Like, tons of people were removed from the property that they lived in, like, for generations and generations, in these tight-knit, cohesive family units, which were just uprooted by this transition. And that's exactly what you're talking about, where basically no one is beholden to anybody, so that basically means everybody is at each other's throat constantly for this cycle of debt that can't be erased.
Exactly.
Like, the idea that you would pay off your debts doesn't exist if your living situation is a debt. It doesn't exist if you can't, like...
Right.
If you can't buy property, what are you going to do? You need to take on, like, the debt of rent or the debt of working all those hours at a factory. So yeah, fucking sucked.
It did suck. And yeah, just deplorable living conditions. We'll talk about a little bit later, but like Engels and Marx, saw firsthand through England, places like Manchester that were industrialized. Like everything related to pollution and death, like got built really quickly, but abating those conditions and upgrading where they live, that kind of lagged behind. So
yeah,
it's
you can smack down a big old soot factory like wherever you want. But because of the fact that, like, you aren't beholden to any of the people there. Like, there's no lord who's going to say, like, this looks ugly, get it out of here. Because we're a free nation. You can build whatever you want, wherever you want. Like, that transition did uproot people from their circumstances. And it also uprooted, like, the way towns and cities work, like, from the bottom up.
Yeah. So...
Dead air.
No, it's... I mean, that's a good place to stop, and I guess we can... move into the French
1848.
So basically, the Industrial Revolution really, and I hate this term revolution because applied to the Industrial Revolution, because we think of revolutions as these positive things that bring positive social changes, and while there were certainly many positive things to come out of the Industrial Revolution,
Celery, I have an iPhone, okay? So
you're typing this from your Jacquard loom, you peasants?
Yeah.
You gotta thank the landholders, okay?
But, a lot of the wealth and a lot of the luxury and the leisure went to the property-owning classes, and the property-owning class continued to shrink. And,
which is the nature of competition.
But yeah, so this was mostly happening in places that had already had their liberal revolutions, or I should say it was happening differently in places that had had their liberal revolutions, like the United States, and the more liberal Great Britain. But it was also happening, the rest of Europe was also industrializing, but in a very different and interesting way, because industrialization was intimately tied to the middle class, and by middle class we mean the property-owning classes. And in Central Europe, it was still very much ruled by these noble lords, and you have
you look
Germany
at
and Italy, for example.
The HRE was still
fractured
around.
States. Yeah, the Holy Roman Empire was still around. You have all these fractured political entities. You don't have nation states as we know them nowadays.
You did have the Westphalian idea that, like, all these countries are distinct, but that didn't solve anything, because now you've got, like, 100 distinct entities that don't cooperate.
They were not politically united, exactly. Yeah. And so there's this growing frictions between, first of all, the various political entities, and also between the classes, between the growing middle industrial property-owning class and the old noble landholding aristocracy or whatever. And so these all come to a head in 1848. and you have revolutions literally all across Europe.
It's a lot like the like Arab Spring or something like that.
Yeah.
Because it was just sort of simultaneous, ad hoc, enormous amounts of like mobilization really quickly, and then it wasn't like today we would think this would come out of like sort of like protests. This was very quickly turned into like armed revolt. But
yes,
it was much more like aimed at a particular class than a lot of these other modern revolutions. Like the Arab Spring and Occupy Wall Street don't really have like objects that they're like, we're going to kill these people and do this.
Actually, I would argue that the revolutions of 1848 were kind of disparate. They weren't very. It was ad hoc, and it was you had these loose, shaky coalitions between the working classes and the middle classes, the property-owning classes, against the nobility. Okay?
What was the extent of the middle class involvement in 1848 revolutions?
Huge. Huge.
Really?
Oh, yeah. Because these were liberal revolutions. I mean, the United States and the French Revolution were very early. And you have to realize, the French Revolution long-term failed. I mean, Louis Napoleon, established an empire. The Republic fizzled away. In 1848, the Second Republic in France was established.
That just keeps happening to France. It's like,
yeah, what do they have, like 5 or 6 republics now?
But they also had another Napoleon come in during a revolution.
Yeah, they had another Napoleon.
Guys, it'll be a republic, I swear. And then like years later, it's like, it's an empire. Shit.
What is it? First is tragedy.
Next time it's comedy.
Yeah, then it's farce.
So we have
next time it's comedy.
Next time on France fucks up again.
So we have all these empires that are fading in the horizon, and here are all these jumped up middle class people who want to basically pound the stake through the heart of the nobility and take control of the state. Essentially, it's the rise of the state.
Right. And the middle class isn't big, and they know that they need working class support. So they use all these liberal ideas. All men are created equal, democracy. They rally around nationalism, uniting these fractured states.
It's just like you put that on the top of any like sort of revolution, and it's immediately just gets fucking worse. It's just like you're like also what else? What else do they like? Nationalism. Hell yeah, they love that shit.
It united people.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing about the revolutions of 1848, even though they were primarily liberal revolutions, for the first time you see socialist groups, socialist ideas kind of make it into the mainstream dialogue in the revolutionary atmosphere.
Yeah. So back then is sweet Marx, and he's like, I told you about liberals, man.
I told you about the liberals, bro.
Yeah, and it was the Communist League of Germany that they were
really
found
they were the
found
first
their
people
boy.
to take that liberal idea to its like conclusion, rather than to say like, oh, we don't want to go too far with the whole cutting off heads thing.
Oh no, they weren't the first people by any means. I mean, socialism and communism and anarchism, that they didn't have like it wasn't a coherent idea, but these ideas had been around since the beginning of the century.
Yeah, but there was no real movement behind them.
There was no real movement. Yeah, this is the first time.
Like when all these liberal revolutions happen, it was just kind of like, okay, we've gotten rid of all that stuff. Now, how do we structure society? And they mirror it in the image of what just happened. This was the first movement that was truly saying like, no, when you're done, you need to do it in a radically new way.
Yeah, so that's what Marx was advocating in the manifesto and in other works that he wrote. He was, maybe there's something wrong with liberalism. Maybe, it didn't go far enough to, truly ensure that all people are equal in the eyes of the law or society or however. So, and this is kind of against this backdrop of these revolutions of 1848. The Communist League of Germany petitioned Marx and Engels to write this manifesto. And they did. They wrote this pamphlet. But do we want to talk about them and about their lives first? Do you guys want to take it away?
Yeah. So this Marx and Engels were like this terrible twosome who just like they clicked from practically the moment they first met. They were.
Where did they met in college, right?
Yeah. Where did they meet? I think so. Yeah. They were like, but it was very like they knew of each other.
At a cafe in Paris.
They knew of each other. They were on the same page, but they didn't really like work together until like shit started getting very, very like, okay, there's gonna be a revolution happening. Where do we go? So Marx, the more famous of the two, probably because he was like the meaner and louder and more like slapping pans together and screaming from like his hotel in England, like, no, you gotta kill him, you gotta kill it. Like, you know, he was a
true believer.
Yeah, and more than like just being a true believer, he would follow through. He never pulled a punt. He would dig into anybody who like even slightly misinterpreted something.
They were kind of like the Chapo trap house of their day. Like, yeah. they would attack.
I mean,
any
you
institution.
read him talking about Proudhon, or I mean, I don't know how to pronounce it, but you
Proudhon.
Proudhon, and you talking about him, talking about basically any anarchist, and he's just like, these jokers, they don't know what the fuck they're talking about. And he would fuck them up and like write these like 500. He called Max Stirner
Saint Max.
Saint Max, and it's like he's just like
it's Officer
brutal
Ricky
as fuck.
It's like 50 Cent.
It's like this brutal as fuck like demolition of anybody who disagrees with him, and he emerges at the other end as like this figure who everybody's like, well, yeah, he was right. But because of how hard he fought to do that, which was in part like created by the fact that he lived, by far of all these people, he lived the shittiest life of them all. He started in Germany. He was like he was working as a newspaper editor during the revolutions of 48, and then got kicked out of Germany, got kicked out of, I think, France, got kicked out of a couple of countries, and ended up in England, where he lived in a shithole apartment in an industrial working class area, and basically he owned like 2 chairs. He just, I mean, true dirtbag left right there, like fucking living in dirt. He had a huge family, and like a lot of his kids just kept dying because, you know, you live in like shit.
Industrial Revolution Manchester is a fucking nightmare. Like, nobody would ever want to live there.
It's like the thing is, like, you look at like look at all these countries that didn't industrialize themselves, and it's like, oh, they're all living in huts. It's like, motherfucker, look at Manchester in the 60s. It's like they would wish they had huts that they could own.
A nice hut in, like in a field. Like, that sounds amazing.
A nice clean hut with like a dirt floor, and there's no like piss on it.
And there's a brook nearby that's not polluted.
Yeah. Oh my God, clean water. Holy shit. Like, that's where Marx was. He was situated in like the shittiest fucking place imaginable. Yeah. And from that, he just gets angry and angrier and angrier for like 14 years until he basically puts together the Communist International.
It was like communism came from him like a diamond under pressure, like under the stressors and anger of his existence.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, yeah, and he lived. I mean, Engels paid for his entire life. He made like less than a couple of pounds a month or so. He could afford nothing. His family was like constantly falling apart. He had his kids wait at the door, and like anytime a creditor would come up, they would just be like, "Mr. Marx isn't home," and they would like wave him away.
So in defense of venture capitalism, we have Engels, who is like
Engels is the Peter Thiel of communism.
So he's like this Prussian, rich kid, and he was getting all these radical ideas back home, so his father decides to send him to a mill to work and
pull him up by his bootstraps.
Yeah, he gives him some bootstraps and sends him to the mill, like, where they, own and lord over with 200 workers already, that kind of, I got $1 million loan to start my life,
Right.
So he meets Marx in Manchester, and Engels is kind of like, they kind of have like this yin and yang relationship, like, because Engels is like this kind of womanizer and party guy, and he's rich, and Marx is like, but they just clicked and started writing together, and from that it's like fucking Lennon McCartney, like they just hit after hit after hit.
Yeah, they did not pull any of the, like, at the time it was very common for people to like write together, but sort of like in this academic sense where you're working on the same project. These two guys were literally like joined at the hip academically. They were like, when Marx had his stuff being edited after he died, it was like you'd go to Engels and be like, how do you write this? How do you edit this?
Please,
what is he talking about?
Please channel Marx into this, please.
Yeah, like summon him like with some kind of goat sacrifice and like bring up his spirit. But it was because of that unique condition of having two people who were both like viciously dedicated to like creating this image of what the world could be like, but also doing it in a very academic, economic, and sort of like scientific way, which is the big sell of communism at the time, was that it did follow through on those liberal ideas of rationality and concrete material answers to concrete material questions. What should people's lives be like? How should we value object? How should we structure our economy? And basically, Marx just went through and answered every in Das Kapital and in the Communist Manifesto to a lesser degree, he goes through and says specifically, like, this caused this, and the correct way to respond to that is by making this look like this, creating this perfectly clear vision of what an economy could look like, which then became a social movement. At its core, it was a very academic, economic question for Marx.
And not to go too
he hated
deep I was gonna say, not to go too deep. Like, Engels and Marx were both like students of Hegel and Feuerbach, and
real motherfucking Hegel hours.
And they came, they took Hegel's idea of the dialectical method and created dialectical materialism and historical materialism, which basically became their way of viewing the world. Like, they would take this world view and process every piece of information they could into this granular set of events and chains that lead to change and motion, essentially. And when that's where communism, the future of their economic phase came from, is that deep dedication to that type of thought. And it's like super, like, you can read all about communism and Marx ideas on Capital, but when you go beyond that and underneath that to the dialectical stuff, it's like almost a cultish type of devotion to this way of thought. It's like mind killing. Like, we have to think in this way.
Yeah, they were very much opposed to the like flowery kind of continental language of a lot of the anarchists and even some socialists, where they were like, we need to have all these men living freely and together. It's like, no, we need to know how much we're going to value things by and how we're going to answer these particulars about the economy.
And this, tying in again, this is why, their ideas were so appealing to liberal society. They were based in reason. They were based in scientific method.
All the things that they valued, all the things that were like hammered into them that had created the Western world. Yeah, completely
calculated.
It's much less like what people's perception of socialism as this like touchy-feely, feel-good sort of
utopian
idea.
And they criticized their those who came before them as being utopian, and they use this word in a derogatory as a pejorative.
Yeah.
Other utopian, they're idealists. It's
like they're one step ahead of their critics, like from a century later, who's like, communism would work on paper, but in real life, it's different. It's like that's the exact opposite of what they were doing. They were trying to say, okay, yeah, socialism might work on paper, but you need to answer specific economic questions about it in a rational way. So, I mean, if you note to the listener, if you ever hear someone say like works on paper in any context, just fucking book it. Like,
Haha.
there's no
Book it.
book it. Get the hell out of there. Go back to your ivory tower, like where we all live.
In
And
Manchester,
What I love most- what I-
Manchester.
yeah.
What I love most about that is that no one who says that has ever read Marx.
Oh,
yeah, they
no.
don't even know what it's like on paper. They don't even know what it's like on
Yeah.
They
paper.
have no idea.
That is like some fortune cookie shit. Like whenever somebody says that, my eye is just looking at my brain at that point.
It's the Kool-Aid man coming through the wall. It's like, congrats, dude. You've owned me.
There's a little thing called human nature, buddy.
Oh, bitch.
What about human nature?
Yeah, there's, I mean,
All right. Well,
bullshit.
so the manifesto. From
manifesto.
from the Glimmer twins, fucking Jagger, and comes this this text that we're going to talk about.
Yeah, shall I read those sacred opening lines?
Please.
A specter is haunting Europe. The specter of communism.
Oh, shit.
Oh no, he didn't.
Oh, no, he didn't, boy. Yeah, that Spectre apparently is haunting a lot of places.
Top 10 greatest opening line. Like,
Oh, shit, yeah.
Easily.
Oh, fuck. I mean, when they wanted to, they could be very poetic. Like, with,
Oh, yeah.
like, a Spectre's haunting Europe. That shit is fucking,
That's
like,
great. That's
age
second
old.
only to, like, Call Me Ishmael.
Yeah. It's very earthy. It's very, like, in your face with this whole idea. But that's the point of the Communist Manifesto. Compared to Das Kapital, which the first, like, 6 chapters of is, like, economic writing, and it's incredibly dry, and you don't really have to read it. The Communist Manifesto is straight to the point. You know, this is what we're going to do.
between the eyes.
And, yeah, right between the eyes, right, like, telling you exactly where they're going with this.
Marx opens up with 2 mics, and he says, the specter is haunting Europe, the specter of and he drops one of them, and then he continues.
He gets the other mic, and he's like, it's terrifying the Tsar. And then he drops the mic, just, like, nodding over to Lenin.
Yeah, but that's that's how he starts out. He describes it as a specter, and as it haunting Europe. And what he talks about, what he means by this, he goes on to say, all the powers of old Europe have entered in a holy alliance to hunt down and exorcise this specter. The Pope and the Tsar, Metternich and Guizot, the French radicals and German police spies. And he's saying, like, the fact that all of these powers are uniting against communism tells us that communism is already acknowledged by all the European powers as itself a power.
Yeah.
Which is like,
It's
there's the second mic drop,
Like, fucking, I mean, but also that is not how people at the time considered power. That's not how people viewed state power. That is a very, like, modern idea of, like,
Yeah, I mean,
like when we look at, like, insurgencies in other countries, where, like, this terrifying ghostly group of people with these terror cells, and it's like, you have no idea where they are, you have no idea what's going on, you gotta hunt them down. It's like, that's what he's trying to create. That's the kind of mentality he's trying to create around this philosophy.
And
That
Right.
they're everywhere, they're
It's a-
watching you, they're coming.
And it's very much because, the communist thought, especially as Engels and Marx put it together, was death of everything that had just been built by the revolutions in the capitalist states. It's, of course, they're aligned against it because it's spelling their doom, and it says that it's inevitable. It's like, they almost rail against it out of, like, desperation and instinct.
Yeah. I mean, Marx's life, basically, after he started the Communist International, was just a series of, like, being slightly disappointed every single time a protest fizzled out, because he was like, it's inevitable. There is going to be a revolution. And during his lifetime, there wasn't. So he just kept on, like, edging up to, like, oh shit, it's going to happen. And then it didn't. And it's like, oh fuck, it's going to happen. And then it didn't. Engels was a little bit more, like, level-headed about that. He's like, it'll take time. It'll work. It'll come together. But Marx
but the
was
thing
like,
is, he described the conditions necessary
Yes,
for when it would happen and when it would have to happen. And we can see these in the present day. A lot of the conditions that he described. But first, I want to get into chapter 1 of the manifesto were titled Bourgeois and Proletarians.
Oh, hell.
All right. And here he talks about the relationship between the two classes, and there are only two classes, you know. Either you own property or you work for property. Either you own capital, you are a capitalist, or you work, you know, you must sell your labor in order to survive. And he opens up, again, with a very provocative statement. The history of all hitherto existing society is the history of class struggle.
Another, like, punchy, dope, like, fucking opening.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this, you know, this ties into, this is how he viewed the liberal revolutions. It's a class struggle between the middle class, the property-owning class, and the nobility, you know, and the feudalism. And so,
well, he would have had people when people, like, you know, traditional academia would read a line like that, they would be scoffing, because history before historical materialism was, you know, kings and states, you know, the thing.
Great man theory.
Yeah. This is possibly the most revolutionary and unique part of the manifesto, is that you recontextualize history itself as not like this great man theory, like King Edward did this and then King John did that. It's themes and sort of guiding itself through these gestation stages.
Right. And like the Alexander the Greats and the Caesars and whomever's, you know, they get pushed kind of to the side.
Yeah,
like
they're interchangeable. They're just pieces in this bigger puzzle.
And they're interchangeable. And Marx is saying, like, it doesn't matter who they are. It doesn't. Their face and their name don't matter. They are like they're pawns in the broader. You know, you could swap out any king or any Caesar. You know, whatever.
Yeah.
And they are as much you know, carried by the whims of their class as everyone else.
Yeah.
You know, and so
I mean, he blows the whole great chain of being idea to pieces, and then
absolutely
rebuilds from its components this idea that, like, yes, there is a sort of like hierarchy, but it isn't a hierarchy of duties, and it isn't a hierarchy of like of personalities and responsibilities. It's a hierarchy of power, goods, and the relationship between those with them and those without them.
And this, I think, I want to just say here, this is probably, of all of Marx's ideas, this is the one that has stuck the most. This is one that even a lot of liberals have adopted, this class struggle look on history even.
This is very mainstream now. I mean,
it's very mainstream nowadays. I mean, great man theory is dead.
Nobody gives a shit about that.
Nobody pays attention to it. So, and you know, nowadays we call it social history or whatever, but it's really this very Marxist interpretation.
It's a very haunter specter haunting history classes. We will liberate the word Marx.
Later on, he goes to criticize the liberal state. Specifically, one line that I really liked, that I felt hammered home this point is. He says, the executive of the modern state is but a committee for managing the common affairs of the whole bourgeoisie.
Yeah.
Okay. So, again, that is...
I mean, that's a punch in the fucking jaw to any of those libs who are saying, like, oh, this is representative. This is from the will of the people. He's saying, no, it isn't. It's still the same class-power relationship, just
a different class.
Yeah, put into a different box and labeled differently so that people don't get mad at it.
The dictatorship of the bourgeoisie is how he characterized it.
Well,
yep.
What I kind of like when I first started getting into the heavier, you know, like, shit's fucked up, you're pissed off, you want to break stuff. But after you calm down and you decide to be a socialist or a communist and you start reading, one of the paragraphs, especially in this chapter, that was like really just like spoke to me was the bourgeoisie, by the rapid improvement of all instruments of production. Now this is like 770 something?
No, this was in 48.
Oh, 48, okay. So this is 1848. So the bourgeoisie, by the rapid improvement of all instruments of production, by the immensely facilitated means of communication, draws all, even the most barbarian nations in civilization, the cheap prices of commodities of the heavy artillery, which it batters down all the Chinese walls, forces barbarians, blah, 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 blah. So basically, it compels them to introduce what it calls civilization in their midst, to become bourgeois themselves. In one word, it creates a world after its own And what is that? That's neoliberalism.
The globalists. The globalists.
It's
I got hot dialectic flowing through my veins. Like, I mean, but that paragraph, and first of all, it puts Marxism and, I mean, communism, but more specifically Marxism, into this global perspective that it's not just, Germans are getting fucked over and those French aren't. There is a cabal controlling all of this capital, and it influences entire nations. It pretends that it's doing improvements when it's really just solidifying its power. That is huge.
And it's not even a cabal, really, because calling it a cabal would kind of imply that, they're acting as one united mind, but really they're acting independently in their own best interests. It's the nature of bourgeoisie.
True,
It's their nature to expand constantly, to find new markets all over the globe, to find new ways to exploit old markets.
This is in 48, and he's talking about, like, colonialism as an aspect of global capital. That's directly related to, like, current issues with capitalism. I mean, you look at, like, exporting jobs, and the answer, I mean, when people in America are like, they took our jobs and sent them to India or something, they're facing the same issue here. They're facing the same idea that these people it's inevitable that they will cut you out as an externality because you don't matter in the big equation of how do we expand capital.
minimize and maximize.
So one thing that I really like about Marx and the way he writes is he uses a lot of this wonderful imagery. Like in the beginning, he opens up with this image of communism as a specter haunting Europe. And just a few paragraphs after what Marcus just read, he goes on to say, modern bourgeois society with its relations of production, of exchange, and of property, a society that has conjured up such gigantic means of production and of exchange is like the sorcerer, who is no longer able to control the powers of the subterranean world which he has called up by his spells.
Yo, he predicted Disney.
The Sorcerer's Apprentice.
Yeah, Mickey Mouse is a metaphor for global capital. Disney is a Marxist.
How did we never see
But
it?
this here, this right here, it's not a cabal. It's, they're not acting as a united. They've lost control. They don't have control over the forces. They have to follow it. So again, this just
It's the perversion of the invisible hand. It's the idea
Yeah.
The invisible hand isn't like bringing you to this like Elysian field where you're like, oh, everything.
The invisible hand is dialectical materialism.
Yeah, the invisible hand is you're unsustained. This can't work forever.
It's
pushing
you to a meat grinder.
Yeah, it's the invisible hand sitting above like a big churn that's just like grinding all of you people into dust. But the bourgeoisie are happy because they're the last ones who are going to get ground down. So they're like,
right.
It works. But
they're delaying the inevitable.
We just have to keep finding new nations of labor to exploit, and we'll be fine.
Which has never stopped, and it's just whoever's doing the exploiting the most, it changes, but. It's now your shirts are made in Laos. What happened to made in Taiwan? It's like that.
And nowadays we're starting to see it kind of collapse in on itself as over the past 30, 40 years or whatever in the United States and in the West, the economy has stopped growing for the middle and working classes.
The tendency of the rate of profit to fall has held
exactly.
up. I mean, it's held up. That's a pretty big fucking indicator that maybe this Marx guy is onto something.
Well, it's like, and it's not even like so much capital now is just this fucking exotic, funny money that it's all these speculative portfolios of ridiculous. It's almost like it's like a gambling, like all the mortgage crisis shit, and they're not even making real products anymore. They're just It's
and the response of most mainstream economists was at the time to just say, well, this is a natural effect of markets. You build up all this capital, and then times get bad, and the capital vanishes. But Marx is pointing out that, like, that's not just happening that's not just happening because it's an effect of markets. It's happening because there are material things that you're not able to control. And one of those things is, like, supply of labor and your power to manipulate it. Like, the whole Keynesian and... not really Keynesian, but what is it? Austrian idea that markets regulate themselves, I mean, doesn't really fly when you look at it as a historical continuum of
all these boom and bust cycles.
Yeah,
and
boom and bust cycles that are uncontrollable and completely outside of like the economy's ability to react to them.
I don't know about y'all, but I feel very comfortable that the Dow is over 20,000. It's just gonna keep going up.
Dude, yeah, no, it can't go down. It can't go down. Dow started at $69 a share, and now it's 20,000. That's just normal. That's just how numbers go. They go up. No, they don't go down.
And
folks, the numbers. They just go up.
If you look,
yeah. Sorry, Marcus.
I was gonna say, like, if you look at like over the last 100 years, like wage stagnation and people fighting for better pay, better treatment, and the bread and butter of capitalism for 150 years was making their extra money off of exploiting the labor. And as soon as labor starts to get some type of awareness of what's being done and doesn't want to live like shit anymore, and especially in the
why would they want that?
I don't know. It's
what the fuck?
And
look at how high those numbers are going.
And so,
you want to stop that?
So across the country, people organize. People say, "I don't want to live like shit anymore and make no money," and it's capitalism has to scramble to justify itself and keep expanding. And we're building to a point where they're trying to grind us down under. It's all coming to a head.
Yeah, and I think. Like the labor situation today, where like productivity goes up, wages remain the same. That is what happens when there is no like real outside of the economy push to protect labor from the economy. And so basically, we're going back to what normal conditions are in a capitalist country, where productivity has to go up because you have to keep producing more and more. As those numbers just start getting higher, and as those numbers get more and more divorced from the real conditions of people's lives and goods being exchanged, you end up in a really weird situation where you make a shit ton of money doing nothing, where most of the economy is money being made doing nothing, whereas that money basically can't be applied to solve issues that money is normally used to solve, like hunger or poverty or any of the kind of social ills that we want solved. When you get to the point where money can't be used to do that, there's something systemic going on, which is what Marx is predicting.
These are problems that plague mostly the proletariat and do not fall on the bourgeoisie. And
no, dude, they're suffering. They're suffering. Their taxes, they keep going up.
Yeah.
They keep going up. They can't pay. What the fuck?
But Marx goes on to describe, he spends the first half of the chapter talking about the bourgeois, and then he goes on to talk about the proletarians, and he starts off by saying that owing to the extensive use of machinery and the division of labor, the work of the proletarians has lost all individual character, and consequently all charm for the workman. He becomes an appendage of the machine, and it is only the most simple, most monotonous, and most easily acquired knack that is required of him. So, by the increasing use of machinery and division of labor, we become alienated.
Have you ever seen the like, there was this big thing in the 50s where factory workers would have their bodies studied kinematically to see, like, how far away could they reach? How close could they grab something? Like, how much would they have to twist their spine to reach behind them to grab some object to attach to? Like, and how could we make that more efficient by change? It literally turned the human body into a machine that you could build more efficient machines around.
Right.
That is, I mean, that's the most nightmarish kind of divorce from your labor that you can have.
And there's so much, people listening can think about the jobs that they have and the way in which, their job is designed to accommodate them, but really it's not accommodating you or for your comfort, it's to make you a more efficient worker.
Well, and also to make you essentially a replaceable part. Like,
did you ever see, there was this article where it was talking about, like, making... is jerking off at work to increase your productivity a good thing? And it's like, what the fuck? Jerking off at work might be a good thing. Just do it, dude. But no, you have got to contextualize it as to be more efficient.
If we got a scientific study that said if you rub one out at the job, it increases your productivity by 15%, there would be jerk-off rooms at every goddamn business across the country.
Good.
Yeah,
Good.
no, it'd be like Google, but that's the thing. Like, you look at Google where they're like, look, we give you free lunches, we give you free healthcare, we let you hang out with your friends in the quad, and it's like, those are not put there just because Google's like super nice. Google's not.
Google is gonna pioneer the jail rooms.
Yeah,
And then
if Google found
then
out
and
that,
then
like,
the
torturing people
MRAs
got the productivity up, they'd do that. Like, if they're like, if you kick them in the balls every 30 minutes,
carrot and stick.
yeah, I mean, and Marx is predicting a lot of that. The idea that by any means necessary, and by all means necessary, you'll see these different kinds of ways to take from the proletariat more and more and more
Oh,
of this
yeah,
surplus labor.
And he goes on to say, no sooner is the exploitation of the laborer by the manufacturer at an end that he receives his wages in cash. And then he is set upon by the other portions of the bourgeoisie, the landlord, the shopkeeper, the pawnbroker, etc. So, first of all, you know, you're exploited for your labor at your job. You're paid wages, and then you have to go spend your wages. You have to pay rent, you know. You have to buy the necessities of life.
Yeah, like
and
scrip.
now there are
like when they were talking about scrip, it's like clearly to us today that's a horrifying, like, what? You only get paid in coupons? You don't get paid in money to do your job? But if you view it systematically, whereas he's saying, like, there's the bourgeoisie, there's the proletariat, basically all of your pay is scrip to the proletariat. All of your pay, you can't use it to do anything else other than to continue to fund this bourgeoisie class.
You don't
Right,
You don't
right.
you don't gain any stake in what you create. You don't gain any property.
Yeah.
You just get enough.
Yeah, you don't have any stake in your labor. You don't get to enjoy the full fruits of your labor. And you know, wage labor is effectively a form of taxation. You know, if you want to think about it that
that was
way.
coercion. I entered into this contract freely. What?
The NAP.
You are violating the NAP by requiring that I get up and jerk off in this bathroom. So I will instead be jerking off at my desk.
Have you met your JO quota for the day?
This workplace has gone 3 days since its last JO incident. But you know, you have OSHA coming in and inspecting, like, everyone's dicks, and being like, look, this is an unsanitary workspace. We're gonna need to do a group meeting on jerk off technique.
You really need to change out that warming lube with some water-based lube in the the JO rooms.
and you don't. And remember, you can't switch them up. You can't switch them up. You got
We're inspecting the different kinds of lotions and
This is not up to our standards.
I'm happy that we're pioneering the JO revolution for capitalism.
It's like we're gonna disrupt the hand job market.
But one thing that I also found really poignant is that he goes on to talk about the lower strata of the middle class. And again, to Marx, the middle class is the property-owning class. So he talks about the lower strata of the middle class, the small tradespeople, shopkeepers, retired tradesmen, the handicraftsmen, farmers, people who own property, who own their own labor. They gradually sink into the proletariat, partly because their diminutive capital does not suffice on the scale for which modern industry is carried on and is swamped in the competition with large capitalists, partly because their specialized skill is rendered worthless by new methods of production. Thus, the proletariat is recruited from all classes of the population. And I think we can see this today. Small business ownership has been on the decline. Small businesses are routinely bought up by larger corporations and large businesses.
Well, I mean, small businesses are one of the largest employers, like, as a group, are one of the largest employers in America. But you're right, they are vanishing. There's fewer and fewer of them.
As soon as a Walmart moves into town, I mean, I'm speaking anecdotally here, but we used to have down the street from me, we had a small ma and pa hardware store. And we very recently got a Lowe's home improvement store in our town, and that mom and pa hardware store did not last very long.
It's essentially neoliberalism on, like, a smaller scale. Like, the capitalist class mega store moves in, and their shit's so cheap that everybody has to buy it. And
which is what he said. He said in the thing, it's like they make it so cheap that you have to
Right, because of these
involved.
economies of scale and because of the sheer amount of capital that I mean, in some cases, look at Amazon or look at Uber. These are huge companies that can operate on losses quarter after quarter in order to just
how long has
absolutely.
Uber run on like an enormous loss? Like how long have they been gone?
Even
without going for profit?
Amazon. I don't
Yeah.
think Amazon has ever made a profit.
I mean, I think they did recently, but it was like after like an enormous
A decade?
Yeah,
But
But yeah, I order
yeah,
something from Amazon, and it's like, I pay a ridiculously low price, and they give me free 2-day shipping, and it arrives at my door in like 36 hours.
you get it in 2 days.
And I'm like,
it
what?
like
How is anybody
Like, I-
making money?
yeah.
and, like, I-
but
you
they
know,
don't-
I feel-
they don't need to make money. They just need to be able to extract value and keep people like suckling from that teat.
Well, what they do is they just completely destroy, competition and just swallow them all up. And in this way, they absorb more capital. They can continue operating on losses because, they're playing a long-term game because they have the capital resources to be able to do that. And, with Amazon, not only, they're expanding to the point where now I believe they're talking about right now they use, I think, UPS. They have a partnership or whatever with UPS, but they're talking about expanding to do their own shipping, to have their own fleet. They're talking about using drones to deliver packages to people. So they can operate on a loss and continue to grow, and in this way,
Because the thing is, that loss isn't of material. It isn't of like. It isn't a loss that's like, oh shit, we don't have anything anymore. It's just they spend a certain amount, they make a certain amount.
It's not as much excess value as they
Yeah.
would like to have, but they're still rolling in capital.
Because I mean, it's not like they're short that money. It's like, oh shit, they're gonna come knocking at my door. It's not debt in the sense that we view debt, because we, the proletariat, have to be beholden to these debts. To them, that debt is a springboard into more and more and more opportunities. Debt is a tool.
Are you saying it's success win?
Yes,
it's a success win.
They literally inhabit a success win world. Success win is the most petite bougie thing anyone in the world can believe. Like, if you honestly are like, oh yeah, I failed 30 times, I'm $1 million in debt, but the next time, and I mean, like, the fact that you're not living under a bridge is just like a testament to like the power of class.
Can you ever go broke? I would love to meet the millionaire who came into his money and then lost it all and just like fucking sold shoes for the rest of his life.
Yeah, like the only billionaire I think in recent history who's gone from a billionaire to a non-billionaire was J.K. Rowling, and that was because she donated a shit ton of money.
Yeah,
like you'd have to try to go out of your way to leave that class. Like, you'd have to, and the thing is, she isn't from that class. She was like a working class mom who
started from the bottom.
Started from the bottom. Now she's there. Now she's closer to the bottom than she was at her peak, but still, pretty fucking high up there. But the class is inescapable, and it's connected to all of these other forms of excising wealth from whoever has whatever you want. It's in part a play between your class, your position economically, where you live, and all these things come into play. But fundamentally, it is always there's the people who have, and there are the people who have not.
That's pretty profound, Malloy.
Whoa! I mean, someone should write that down.
Hashtag deep.
Hashtag we're in this. Hashtag real thinking hours.
So they go on to talk about here's some more dialectical materialism for you. Go on to talk about collisions between the classes of old society advancing in many ways the course of development of the proletariat. At first, the bourgeoisie finds itself involved in a constant battle, at first with the aristocracy, later on with other portions of the bourgeoisie itself. For example, the large capital owning and the smaller business owners, whose interests have become antagonistic to the progress of industry. At all times, the bourgeoisie is engaged with this constant battle with the bourgeoisie of foreign countries. And in all of these battles, it sees itself compelled to appeal to the proletariat, because the bourgeoisie, although they control capital, account for a very minute portion of society. So they need to ask the proletariat for help, politically, socially, militarily, whatever. And so in doing this, they slowly, gradually, over the past 150, 200 years, have dragged the proletariat into the political arena. Okay,
and that, I think that is the most damning criticism of liberalism.
Well, this is what he says next. The bourgeoisie itself, therefore, supplies the proletariat with its own elements of political and general education. In other words, it furnishes the proletariat with weapons for fighting the bourgeoisie.
Yeah. But the thing is, the liberal perspective on that relationship is, well, you can vote them out. You can use these existing power dynamics to manipulate a sector of this predatory relationship. I mean, even if they go so far as to accept that it's a predatory relationship, their response to it is, well, manipulate it within that relationship. What Marx is trying to say is, like, take the fucking wool off your eyes and accept the fact that, like, this happens over and over. You'll always be given this opportunity, this kind of fake chance to turn those bastards out and get the real people to fight for you in. And then when that happens, it turns into they are now the bourgeoisie does what the bourgeoisie does, which is extract wealth from labor.
Unless the person you're going to elect says that capitalism is my political enemy. Like, so what we have now in America is, you know, the same exact situation and relationship that you describe, and we get mad at our politicians and we vote them out. What do? They go consult or they lobby. They like, oh, okay, I'm going to hit the showers. They like walk off the stage. They grab a beer. They make $8 million a year to talk and lobby. And
them iron triangles, boy.
And sometimes they come back and they, you know, well, we're pissed at this guy now. So, oh, the asshole's back now. We're going to vote him and give him another shot. Like, there's no actual change in any of the structures.
Yeah.
Democrat, Republican, it's a fucking cliche image with the goddamn capitalist, fucking evil capitalist with the...
Because the executive is simply the common committee for managing the affairs of the bourgeoisie.
Aha.
Holy shit.
Hashtag dude.
We're woke now. We're woke.
Real woke hours.
But yeah, I think that idea that, like, people take the whole, like, the Republicans, Democrats, the same thing, the wrong way a lot. Because they think, no, they materially have different positions on two things. They support abortion. They don't. They are racist. They're less racist. They're pro-gay marriage. These people aren't. But
they're pro-Gamergate. They're anti-Gamergate.
Yeah, I concern myself with 3 issues: vaping, gaming, and men's rights. And I will die for any of them. But I think the issue isn't how do they feel about any particular political question, which is like yes or no, abortion, gay marriage, weed, whatever. It's more, you think that the current system of power and how it's distributed works. And invariably, I mean, every politician always says America's, great, or America's good, or America's, already great, or there's some kind of like relationship to power that America has that's stable and solid and it works.
But
and
at their foundation, the Democrats and Republicans are exactly the same. They operate on the same exact economic principles.
Yeah.
Even when they disagree economically, it's within a very small window.
They're like, we should tax more. We should tax less. Nobody's saying we should get rid of taxes. Nobody's saying there are people, but those are the people who say like we should give heroin to 5-year-olds.
Right, and they're not saying like we should get rid of taxes. They're not even saying we need to completely restructure our tax. Like Americans hate the way taxes work. They hate the way taxes are structured.
If you took a random poll of people and just said like, do you want taxes to look like they do now or like a different way? Virtually everybody would.
Everybody is in favor of simplifying the tax code, and politicians, they'll pay lip service. They'll pay lip service to we need to simplify the tax code, but none of them will do it.
Because they can't. They're by the balls gripped by a system more powerful than their personal will to change the IRS 1040 form.
Because they're part of the same committee for managing the common affairs of the bourgeoisie. It's as simple as that.
The bourgeoisie keeps more and more doing away with the scattered state of the population in the means of production and of property. It's huge. But like that's a fundamental issue with the liberal perspective of change. They view change as not just gradualism, but change within an existing system as the only kind of change, because you need permission to do this, and the people you're getting permission from are the people who will, in the immortal words of Illich, will not give it up voluntarily. If you keep asking them to give it up, they're just going to keep saying no, and you're just going to keep saying, oh, well, next time.
They're not going to give it up. But luckily, according to our good friends, the terrible twosome, what the bourgeoisie therefore produces above all is its own gravediggers. Its fall and the victory of the proletariat are equally inevitable.
Ooh, that's some spicy discourse. Yeah, that's, I think the biggest takeaway from the manifesto is that basically history is mechanical. The world works along certain inevitabilities. There are certain things that you can't escape, and that's all due to the way these relationships are structured. And one of the big things that he claims will happen is that capitalism has to come apart because you can't fool all the people all the time.
Right. His argument is basically rests on what he sees as the inherent contradictions in capitalism.
Yeah.
So it's not really a question to him of if it will fall, but when, because according to him it has to. It by design cannot last forever.
And the idea of it falling is sometimes, I think, misinterpreted. It doesn't necessarily mean like it will collapse in this horrifying, like, dystopian comic book style destruction of the world as we know it, because basically he's just saying there are contradictions within it that need to be addressed and can't be addressed with the way this current system works. You could have a very boring communist revolution. You could have an incredibly, like, dull, like, managerial revolution where it's like, okay, we're just gonna start buying up property and changing. But Marx also...
Bernie could have brought us that version.
Well, I mean, Bernie,
the boring version.
Bernie 20 years ago could have, like energized, fired up younger Bernie. But you could have a sort of managerial kind of revolution. But Marx also predicts that, like, well, not Marx so much as Marxist-Leninism, but predicts that it will have to be by force because you can't negotiate.
And I think that would make an interesting discussion for another podcast. Yeah. But one thing that I always found interesting about that, if you look at the communist revolutions of the 20th century, they are all in what we would today call third world nations or undeveloped nations or whatever. And,
that's right. Reminder, we're Maoists. We're Maoist.
Yeah, we're Maoist. Third worldists. But Marx made the argument that you have to go from the feudal society to a liberal revolution that opens the door for capitalist society, and only once the capitalist society has reached the furthest stage of development and has, the proletariat has become industrialized and so on and so forth, only when all of these conditions have been met can you have a socialist revolution and the socialist society and the withering away of the state and all this. And if you look at these 20th century,
we
don't know what that looks like, because if we look at all these 20th century revolutions, they skipped the liberal capitalism.
Yeah. I mean, the Tsar of Russia had, like, removed serfdom, like, within the generation of the communist revolution there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Like, it was not like they were like this juggernaut of a country that just suddenly, like, was swept away by they were a weird, outdated country that was run by Habsburg-jawed fucks.
The majority of the population was still rural peasantry.
Yeah,
it was like
not a capitalist powerhouse.
It was like the monolith in 2001, like, landed in Russia.
Yeah,
and taught them communism.
All the monkeys start like throwing shit at it, and it's like that's where you get like autocratic Stalinism, which is state cap. I mean, sorry guys, sorry tankies and everybody out there, but socialism in the state is fundamentally
state capitalism
is fundamentally not communism.
I've had a revelation of the last year that, like, and I posted a bit on Twitter, like, all my dudes, and, like, because the state just embodies all these horrors that throughout history. So that's where I'm at with my personal learning.
Yeah, and I mean, there's a lot of interpretations of what that will look like, but I think most far left political positions agree on the material of the manifesto. I think most people who are not anarchists and not like viewing this from a totally different perspective, agree that like there are two classes. Those classes are in conflict. That conflict will be resolved by the proletariat winning.
Can I
think.
Can I read
Yeah.
the great amazing?
Oh yeah, that just swelling.
It's so okay.
Hell yeah.
So the communists, as we learned throughout this manifesto, the communists disdain to conceal their views and aims. They openly declare that their ends can be attained only by the forcible overthrow of all existing social conditions. Let the ruling classes tremble at a communistic revolution. The proletarians have nothing to lose but their chains. They have a world to win. Working men of all countries yet.
Oh,
What is that? Like the fourth mic drop or the
yeah.
fifth?
Fifth or yeah.
He's run out of mics at this point. He's just fucking just tearing down walls.
Fuckley, when you edit this, you need to add in like air horns.
Yeah,
like
that's. But yeah, I mean that pretty much sums up the whole like emotional aspect
that's
of
Marx.
the
That's Marx
manifesto.
as like Salt Bay. Like that's him sprinkling the salt on the manifesto.
Yeah, he's just like working men of all countries unite, and he's like drizzling it down there, looking all sexy, and then like just turning around and like going back into like a shithole house.
yeah, he comes out to lead the revolution, and it's just not ready yet. And
Yeah.
he's just, I guess I'll go home now.
He comes to check on the meat in the oven. It's like another 20 minutes. What the fuck?
Well, and in that 20 minutes, he writes 3 books.
Yeah.
How frustrating.
One of which is just insult. You know what? Marx was the original leftist who just swore a shit ton, because everything that he writes about any other leftist is just like, this fucking moron. He doesn't know what the fuck he's doing. Fuck this guy. Fuck him.
Oh my god! But like,
everything.
unironically, like I love how he tears Stirner apart. And like
God.
Stirner wasn't even a person like at the time. Like
Yeah.
nobody gave a shit about
He was
Max
like some
Stirner.
teacher. He just fucking chilled.
But like Marx just like had it was
to
very
do
it was
it.
personal. It was
Yeah.
personal. You
Yeah.
know, I don't know why, but he really had it out for Stirner.
Yeah, and the thing is, because Stirner was an individual, and the whole idea that like, no, you could have individuals sort of like creating a new society. He's like, what the fuck do you mean an individual? Like, I mean, just so completely
He like
misinterprets
like-
what he's trying to say.
he like quote tweeted an egg account with 3 followers and fucking lambasted him.
He's just like, who the fuck do you think you are, bitch? How many followers you got? Like, that's Marx in a nutshell, pulling like all these obscure writers out of like weird dictionary like citations and being like, yo, fuck this guy, he's going down.
Well, and another thing, I read a really funny a polemic that Engels and Marx wrote, basically against the entire German conception of philosophy. Like,
Oh yeah, they
Oh,
hated
yeah.
romantics. They hated.
Oh,
romantics.
what was that called?
it's something.
I know I've read that.
Yeah, it's something like the German.
It's literally called something like
the
the German
something.
conception of philosophy. It's something like that. But yeah, it's
No, it's literally called like an argument against everything or something to that
Yeah.
effect. Like
The German ideology, I think.
no, that's something different. But they wrote this pamphlet that was basically like everyone is wrong.
Oh wait, no, the German ideology is the one where he goes into Stirner.
Yeah.
Yeah.
yeah. But there's a lot of good stuff there. So start reading, guys. If you're gonna listen to the podcast,
Yeah, absolutely.
you got to start reading.
Yeah. You gotta
Read a
you want to
book.
get the success win lifestyle. You gotta read a lot of books. You gotta fail
up
to
a
read all
book.
those books.
Most-
And then you gotta
Literally
get through
any book.
any book.
Most don't know this.
Not any book.
Some people read 1 to 2 polemics a day. Few.
They don't talk
read 3 to 4.
They don't
I
talk about this
I read
on the mainstream
5.
news.
I read 5 polemics against Max Stirner every day.
They don't want to talk about this. They don't want to talk about. They don't want you to
They
know.
want you to know.
There's
They don't
so
want you to
much knowledge out there waiting to be unlocked. People don't
No,
talk
it's-
about it.
it's-
Pick up a book.
Mark's in his house. It's like, here in my hovel. It's like, I got my 47 books a day here. He's right
Here
instead
in
of
my
reading them, he's
garage.
writing, here in my shack.
Marx never read a book that he didn't like. He would have an issue with and like write a book against it.
Yeah, like for Marx, it was like a 1-to-1 ratio of books read to books written. He was just like, he was writing a book while reading one, just being like, okay, he's wrong here. Okay, cool. He's wrong here too. But I mean, that's what makes him such an engaging writer. He was so prolific, but also, if you like are aware of the beefs at the time, he's basically like pulling everything out of the woodworks and being like, all these people are fucking idiots.
Well, guys, Malloy, I hate to interrupt you, but
Yeah.
we're running on like an hour and 20 minutes now. So,
Yeah.
do you guys wanna sign off, and then maybe we'll leave it up to somebody to edit this.
Yeah, this is the Discourse Collective. Thanks for listening.
This is the Discourse Collective.
This is the Discourse Collective.
Welcome, Fuckley.
Hey, Fuckley.
Thanks, Fuckley.
Thanks for joining.
Thanks, guys.
Hey.